Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last video, we went over how to test Pytest with SQLAlchemy. In this one, we're going to go over Pytest, SQLAlchemy, and FastAPI. I'm going to show you two different project setups. One's going to be a simple project setup and the other one will be an advanced project setup, but the test will work for both of them. All of the code will be linked in the GitHub link in the description. So let's get started. First up, we have a .env file, and this just has a database URL and a project name that we will use in our application. This is pointing to a prod.db SQLite file. We want to make sure that our tests do not generate or modify this file, so we're doing things correctly. We have a create.db file, which whenever we run this, just gets our engine and our base from our models file and creates the database with the tables. And we have our requirements set up here. I am using venv for this as well. You can use anything else like UV or poetry or whatever you want to do, or just no virtual environment at all. So inside of our app folder, we have a few different files as just a simple setup for FastAPI. Then we have our settings file set up here, inheriting from base settings from Pydantic settings. This is a really cool module because you can pass this model config and specify the env file, and it will automatically load it into this class as long as your variable names match the env file. So this project name, database URL are both in the .env file here, right here. Then we have our crud.py file here that just interacts with our database. Then we have our db.py, which just creates this dependency that we'll use in FastAPI. And then go ahead and get our engine, getting our database URL from the settings class here that we import right here, and creating our local session. Then we have our models.py file that just sets up the database models for us. Then we have our routes.py file, and this just sets up routes to interact with our user's endpoint. Then we have our schemas.py file here, and this is just some Pydantic schemas to use inside of our routes file here. So you can see schemas.userCreate, schemas.userRead, same thing down here. And then in this dunder init.py file, we create the FastAPI application, and we go ahead and include the router of user router, which has all of our routes here for our user specific endpoint. So we can go and pull up the console and verify that this works. You can see we don't have a prod.db file set up here. If I go ahead and run the create.db file, it went ahead and created the database right here. Then we can do FastAPI dev app, and this is the app name that you specified for your application. Since we have a dunder init here inside this app folder, we'll just pass it the folder name of app. Go ahead and run it, and we can see it loaded up. And we can go to this docs endpoint to go ahead and verify our routes work and everything, but we're not going to go that direction for this video. We're going to focus on how to set up Pytest with this FastAPI setup. Since we have our FastAPI setup, we're going to go ahead and look into this test folder, and we'll start by specifying this dunder init file. This is just so we can access the app right here within our conf test and test files. So nothing goes in there. Then we'll take a look into our conftest.py file. And if you watched the last video, this is a very similar setup to what we had, where we create the database and all the tables in the beginning of the session. And then at the end of the session, we go ahead and tear down and delete all of the tables in the database for a fresh and clean database for each testing session. Then we have our DB session fixture that's the same as what we had in the last video, where we're creating a connection, a transaction, and then a session, returning the session so we can use it in our test, then closing the session, rolling back everything that happened in the transaction, and closing the connection. So that way the database goes back to how it was before the test started. Then this is where the FastAPI connection comes in. So we have to create a fixture, scope it to a function level, where we create a client. We're going to go ahead and use the fixture of DB session to make this a bit easier. We need to create a function to override the getDB that we have originally passed in. If we go into our app file here and go to our routes file, we have right here DB session is equal to depends of getDB. We need to override this so it does not use the prod database. It uses the test database that we want instead. So we go ahead and try to yield it here. And then after it's done yielding, the database fixture already handles rolling back the database and closing all connections. So we don't have to do anything with that here. We'll go ahead and say app.dependency overrides of getDB will equal the override getDB. Then we'll go ahead and say with test client app as whatever we want to put. So C in this case. Then at the very end, when we're done with the test, we'll go ahead and clear the dependency overrides. This will allow us to test all the routes for our FastAPI application without having to worry about it hitting the wrong database. So first we'll take a look into test main.py file. We have a test in here that says test get user, and we pass in that client fixture. I like to have the type hinting, so I add this test client here from fastapi.testClient. So we'll get a response from this client hitting this endpoint, and we just assert that the status code from this response is either a 404 or a 200. Then we take a look in the test models, and this is very similar to the last video with SQLAlchemy, but we are just testing the different database interactions here. Then we take a look into our test users.py file. And here we're doing some more interaction with our client, doing a post request to the user's endpoint, or doing a GET request to see that the user actually exists. So this first one will create a user by hitting this endpoint, and the second one will get the user that we just created. We can go and pull up the terminal. We'll do Pytest-SV, and we can see all of our tests had passed. And we don't have to worry about this deprecation warning right now. And we can see that even though these tests had run, only a test.db file was created. It did not actually create the prod.db file. So we can be sure that this will not interact with our actual production database or a dev database we have locally to not mess with data we want to use. And we ensure that this is in its own isolated DB for testing. Now we'll take a look into a little more advanced setup for FastAPI integrating with these tests. This one does have a pyproject.toml file set up, and we do use poetry. So there is a poetry.lock file here. But if we take a look in our app folder, it is a little bit different than what we saw before. Everything is basically in its own folder to be a bit more organized than putting everything into one file. So we see things get broken out since there can be a lot more files. This is something you can look through on the GitHub in the link below. I'm just showing that this is a bit of a more advanced setup for FastAPI. We go ahead and open up the terminal. To get started, we can do poetry install. I've already got everything installed, so it's not going to do anything else, but it would install it. Go ahead and clear the console, and then we'll do poetry run FastAPI dev app, just like we did before. It'd be help if I spell it right. And we can see it did start it up. We could go to the docs again and test out it through the Swagger, but we don't need to do that right now. Go ahead and cancel this. To create that prod DB and all the tables, we would have to run this create DB script right here. We go ahead and run it. This terminal started up. It created that database for us. That's awesome. I'm going to go ahead and delete it for now. And the test setup is the exact same as what we saw before with our init file here, our conf test file right here, our test main file, test models, and test users are all the same from what we had before. And our .env file is the same as before. If we go ahead and pull up this terminal, we can type poetry run pytest. And you can see it ran all the tests and passed. And there are some more warnings here, but some stuff that we can't really deal with right now. But this just goes to show if you have a simple FastAPI project setup or a more advanced FastAPI project setup, Pytest integrates pretty much seamlessly with any scale application. So as long as you import your base model, the GetDB dependency, and the app from your FastAPI application, you can easily set up Pytest with FastAPI. Thank you so much everyone for watching. If you found this helpful, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.